Hello, family and friends. Thanks for tuning in today. Wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about um, something that I heard on NPR today when they were discussing school choice and along with this, big hoopla over Amy Barrett. And um, one of the things that struck me and I find very interesting is how, when they were discussing on NPR about school choice, they were saying that one of the particular states, and I can't remember which one it was giving underprivileged and underserved children that would not otherwise have the opportunity to the American dream scholarships to go to better schools and remove them from the violence and the underserved or underprivileged schools that they were a part of. And it struck me as odd, and it took me back. Um, as many of you know, I was born in 1973, so that was the early part of the 70s, which means I'm not that far removed from segregation, and my generation was still feeling the aftermath of that. And I'm sorry, I went to predominantly black schools growing up until high school. And then in about my sophomore or junior year, I went to a more diverse school where there were mostly whites. Still a lot of blacks, but mostly white students. And what what struck me as odd when I was listening to this interview on NPR was how they were talking about underserved and underprivileged schools and how they had to give scholarships to these kids and give them a chance for a better life and for them to be able to escape the violence in their old schools, which of course were the black schools. But um, for the most part, like I said, I went to schools that were predominantly black. And what I would like to share with people is that I had the most love, the most care and concern for me as a person. Um, I was looked after and guarded to the best of their ability from the teachers and the staff and the administration in my predominantly black schools growing up. And I, like many of my other family and friends, we recognize our schools as that was our home. Our teachers were our parents. It was a community. It was a lot of bonding. Our teachers, of course, like many others now, did not get paid a whole lot, but they would still find ways to buy us shoes if we needed shoes. They would feed us from their own tables, out of their own pockets. They would make sure we had school supplies out of their own pockets. They went up and beyond the call of duty. I can remember, um, you know, the the teachers that instilled morals and values in us in those schools. And when they talk about violence in underprivileged schools, I want to say that the what I feel was uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Underserved or underprivileged schools, I find were actually the predominantly white schools. And the reason I say this is because when I had to transfer to these predominantly white schools, I became a number. I can only tell you about one or two teachers' names from my predominantly white schools, and I guarantee you none of them remember me. Um, I didn't know them, they didn't know me. I had one class that I skipped 17 days of school. 17 days. Not one phone call to my parent to let them know that I had been missing school. Nothing. I walked off of a school campus one day and told my assistant principal that I was quitting school when they asked, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to be out here." I said, "I'm quitting school." They said, "Okay." That was the last I heard of that. If if I tried to do that in my predominantly black schools, I can only imagine what my teachers and principals would have tried to do to me out there. Um, when we talk about violence, let's go back to that because I'm rambling a little bit. But when we talk about violence in these schools, underprivileged schools and predominantly black schools, I would be willing to bet that my friends and family would also tell you that the only violence we remember is when we were getting our butts whipped for doing something we had no business when we were in the principal's office. I'm not saying that we didn't fight. Yes, we did. We duked it out on the football fields or, outside behind the school buildings. There were no shootings going on back then. I'm not saying people didn't shoot, they did. But for the most part in our schools, we fought it out. We duked it out. That's how we resolved our problems. And um, it was just, a culture thing, I guess. Um, and the other violence that I remember experiencing was, when they would come through the projects, the police officers, and jack black boys up for, no particular reason, just because they were out there and didn't have any real reason as to why they were harassing them or throwing them up against walls. We would witness them just minding their business, and all of a sudden cars would pull up with their blue lights and, harass people for no reason, just because you're in what they consider a drug infested community or a violent community. Um, I don't see it as such. What I can say is that the very first drug exchange, people selling drugs in the school, that I ever witnessed was when I went to the very first predominantly white high school. I didn't know that kids brought bottles of liquor and that they sold drugs in the school until I went to the predominantly white schools. Our teachers and administration would have never put up with that in our underprivileged and underserved black schools. You would have had your buns on fire. And they didn't care how old we were. We weren't grown. And even when we got grown, we still weren't grown. I'm 47 years old, and I can tell you that some of my black teachers and staff that I still communicate with, they don't see me as grown. Um, so, at any rate, when they talk about, us black students needing scholarships and being, needing help to get out of these violent schools and these underserved and underprivileged schools and environments. I beg to differ, and I think that these kinds of things need to be reevaluated, because I feel like I got the best education in the predominantly black schools because my teachers cared about me. I wasn't just a number. They came around to check on me, to see if I understood my work. They didn't label us. Um, there was no such thing as kids being on ADHD medication or ADD medication. You set your behind down and you did what you were supposed to do, and they would help you focus if you did not know how to focus. Um, so I say all that to say, and I have to throw this out there and credit Coach Sherman Henson, because I would say he is probably one of the oldest elders of our teacher and staff from my schools. Coach Henson, he wasn't our, you know, teacher per se. He didn't teach us uh, most of our classes. In other words, he wasn't my math, my social studies, or my science teacher. He was our coach. He was our physical fitness instructor. However, Coach Henson had a critical role to play, and that was to keep us straight. The whole school, the entire school. You didn't play at school, because your butt would be in trouble with Mr. Henson. Coach Henson did not play, and any of our teachers would call on him if needed, including our principal. And we also had Miss Harris, that's Coach Henson's wife. Such a lovely, lovely lady. She was the manager of our cafeteria, and if it was cold outside, it could be 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. If we were outside and it was cold, even though the school said, you guys aren't supposed to be on school grounds at this time, well, a lot of us had to get to school because that was our safe haven. We didn't have anywhere else to go. And most of us didn't want to be at home. We wanted to be with our friends. Miss Harris would let us in that building. She didn't care what they said. She let us in that building and make sure we had eaten some breakfast, and we were good to go, and we were safe. So, again, the only violence I experienced was when we were doing things we had no business in the school, and our teachers and the staff would get in behind us. And we had loving teachers. And there was one other thing that I wanted to touch on, and that was, this what people consider to be underprivileged, and underserved, and in bad neighborhoods. Is it really the people that are there? Or is it how the system of things make it? I'm not saying that people in low income places don't have their faults, because they do. Keep your area, your community, your houses, your housing units, your apartments. Keep them clean. Keep your communities clean. You want your place, your environment to always look presentable. You want people to be able to come through your neighborhood and not know if this is a white or a black neighborhood. But the one thing that I can say is even here in the streets of Atlanta, Georgia, there are many, many streets that you go down and there are huge potholes that will tear your car all to pieces. There are stoplights that don't work. They're not systematic like, of course, in the white neighborhoods. The potholes don't seem to be the same in the white neighborhoods like they are in the predominantly black neighborhoods. The police presence is not the same in the two separate neighborhoods. When you see police presence in black neighborhoods, they're looking to figure out who they can interrogate, who they can incriminate, who they can harass. When you go in the white neighborhood, they're simply patrolling to make sure the white people are safe. So when you talk about violent communities or violent schools, you need to assess how is it that they became that way. You need to look back in history because history repeats itself. And when you also try to set up a system for people to behave the way you want them to, or live up to your standard of living, or be whitewashed in the manner that you feel like they should be, or, you expect people to have the racehorse syndrome and believe that one race is superior than the other, you have to take a look at yourselves. We have to take a look at ourselves. We have to be the change that we expect from the world. And I don't speak about things that I don't have personal experience on. So these are just some things that I wanted to share with you all. I know I've rambled on a little bit, but the school choice and those words that they were throwing out really baffled me because I had far worse harsh experiences in the predominantly white schools than I did in the predominantly black schools. What I do know is that the money is not there in the black neighborhoods like it is for the white neighborhoods, whether it be in the school or the communities or what have you. So we need to look at ourselves as a whole and figure out how we can level the playing field and ensure that every community, because in the United States, there should never be children who are treated differently, who are not served the same way as what some call the superior race's children. There are other children of color who are not treated the same. We need to take a look at those systems, examine them, and ask ourselves, why are they this way? Why do they rebel this way? Why do they not feel like the way we want them to live is correct? Do people of color trust white people? Most of them don't. But history has given us a reason not to. In the same way that white women grab their purses when black men are in stores or walking near them in a parking lot or in the park, when they clutch their purses because they're afraid, is the same reason many people of color run when they see the police coming. It's a matter of trust. And when you think about whites and blacks, and I hate to go white and black all the time, but those are the two races, those are the two rivals, like Duke and UNC, if you know anything about North Carolina. When you think about race and you think about black and white people, who really should be afraid? As a whole, do black people have a history of invading people's land, enslaving them, beating them in the heads with boot heels, feeding their babies to alligators, hanging people in the streets and burning crosses for Christianity and doing it in the name of God? The same people that criticize and judge people that worship Allah because they do things in the name of Allah. However, the KKK do things in the name of God and Christ when they're burning crosses and they're hanging black men from trees. And these things still go on today. This is not, something from the past. What was it, last year, 2019? There were 3 black men hung in Durham, North Carolina from trees. They said, I think one was suicide. Now, I don't know about you guys, but it would be kind of hard for me to get up in a tree and put a noose around my head and hang myself from a tree. And I'm telling you right now, if you guys find me with a noose around my neck, I didn't commit suicide. Somebody killed me, okay? You remember that. However, back to what I was saying. When we talk about these types of things, we need to really do our research and engage in serious questions about why certain communities or certain schools are the way they are. Why some seem better, or what people consider to be better than other schools. Why these schools don't get as much money as some of the white schools that are public schools. Just think about that. I hope that you guys will comment and have some real dialogue. And I don't mean a bunch of bickering or a bunch of calling people names. I don't want to hear stuff about, an argument about, well, white people were enslaved too. Yes, we know that white people were enslaved. We know that natives were enslaved. We know that natives were slave owners. We also know that black people were slave owners. However, black people have endured many, many years, over 400 years of enslavement and abuse, mistreatment, misjudgment. And so when you call their communities violent, wonder where that comes from. Wonder where that began. You can't turn on a switch and then think you can turn it off when you're ready for it to be off. So we all need to take a look at ourselves, and we all need to figure out what we can do as a people to make a change. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. It's hump day. We're almost at the end of the week, people. This is Stacy Moser, and I'm signing out. Have a good one.